Economics, the pseudoscience. Economics has been criticized as witchcraft, pseudoscience, and even a cult. A notable example of its failures is the case of the Long-Term Capital Management Company, LTCM, in 1998. Despite being managed by renowned investor John Meriwether and using scientific trading methods developed by Nobel Prize winners Myron Scholes, Robert Merton, and Fisher Black, the hedge fund went bankrupt in a short period of time. Another sign of the shortcomings of economics is its inability to predict and resolve major global financial crises, such as the 2008 recession and the ongoing global recession. The economic crises that occurred in 1929, 1987, 2001, and 2008 seemed to catch economists off guard, even though they were experts. According to Franklin Allen, a finance professor at Wharton University, economists often ignore the possibility of such crises because they rely on mathematical equations that ignore the role of banks and other financial institutions. After the 2008 financial crisis, some economists called for a complete restructuring of the economics curriculum. They believed it was completely out of touch with reality. It is therefore important to note that no field of science, be it economics, political science, sociology, history, or philosophy, can consistently predict these impending crises accurately. One question that economists and scholars in general tend to avoid asking is why, after the economic theories of John Maynard Keynes and Milton Friedman were adopted in the United States, recessions became more frequent and required larger stimulus packages to rescue the markets. Keynes argued that classical economic theory lacked a solution to end recessions. Indecision caused individuals and businesses to cut back on spending and investment, thus requiring government intervention through spending to revive the economy. Therefore, during a market downturn, the government would intervene to lower interest rates and implement stimulus packages to support the economy. For example, in response to the 2008 recession, the U.S. Congress passed the $152 billion Economic Stimulus Act of 2008, which was aimed at preventing a recession. Then, shortly after President Obama took office in 2009, facing a legacy recession, he urged Congress to approve a stimulus package totaling nearly $800 billion in tax cuts and spending. The 2020 COVID-19 pandemic led to even larger aid packages, with President Trump authorizing measures exceeding $3 trillion. Then, in 2021, President Biden signed a $1.9 trillion stimulus package to address the economic and public health crises related to COVID-19. In total, Congress has committed $3.6 trillion in financial support through 5 pieces of legislation. Today, most economists accept John Keynes' ideas. Entrepreneurs and economic stimulus. Many economists credit Keynes' ideas with ending the Great Depression of 1929, but that may not be entirely accurate. From 2008 to 2022, the economy received more than $8 trillion in stimulus to shore up the economy. However, the Federal Reserve now faces the challenge of fighting inflation by raising interest rates. This situation highlights the potential downside of relying solely on stimulus measures, as they may not actually create the necessary demand. Real demand is created when entrepreneurs come up with groundbreaking innovations. For example, Henry Ford's invention of the automobile created significant demand and propelled the economy to new heights. Similarly, geniuses like Steve Jobs with the personal computer and the iPhone, Bill Gates with the Windows operating system, and Elon Musk with electric cars have all driven real economic growth through their innovative products. During the Great Depression, it was not just government spending that brought it to an end. The demand for weapons from European nations during World War II helped lift the United States out of the Great Depression. The war effort created a huge increase in employment, with millions of Americans entering military and defense-related jobs, significantly reducing unemployment. However, investment in weapons led to the creation of the military-industrial complex, as President Eisenhower had warned. The second law of thermodynamics. The military-industrial complex has led the United States and the United Kingdom into endless, unwinnable wars that have caused widespread destruction and suffering. Millions have lost their lives and countless civilians have suffered as a result of these conflicts. Addressing the complex's influence is essential to achieving lasting peace. As of October 2024, the United States debt has exceeded $35 trillion, with a significant portion of it being spent on the military-industrial complex and its more than 750 overseas bases, so there is no scientific basis for using stimulus packages to save the economy. Stock market volatility follows the second law of thermodynamics. When it gets too high, entropy increases, forcing it to reverse direction or correction. Entropy simply loses strength. To fix this, more money was pumped into the economy through stimulus packages after events like the 2008 financial crisis, totaling more than $8 trillion between 2008 and 2022. However, this approach leads to a cycle that requires even larger stimulus packages in subsequent recessions, contributing to rising inflation. Also, since the US dollar is the world's reserve currency, raising interest rates by the government would export inflation around the world, leading to hardship in weaker economies and potentially causing some to collapse. Furthermore, there is considerable concern about the significant social dislocation and economic inequality in the US and the UK, compared to other developed countries. Under Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, who was heavily influenced by Friedrich von Hayek, economic inequality and poverty increased significantly in the UK. In the US, Milton Friedman developed a business ethics theory that prioritized satisfying shareholders by maximizing revenue and minimizing costs through limited government intervention, deregulation, tax cuts, and privatization. Both Hayek and Friedman were closely aligned with the interests of the financiers, with Friedman even receiving the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1976, apparently facilitated by a billionaire. Trickle-down economics, or Reaganomics, was the economic philosophy of President Ronald Reagan from 1981 to 1993. Trickle-down economics advocated that tax cuts for entrepreneurs would create jobs for the poor. While some economists believe that President Reagan's leveling of the playing field and expansion of economic thought were Friedman's ideas, they were actually Fed Chairman Paul Volcker's efforts to curb inflation and restore investor confidence through continued interest rate increases. However, Friedman's ideas contributed to the 2008 financial crisis, as many domestic and foreign investors poured billions of dollars into banks and credit rating agencies. Notably, after Friedman's ideas became the guiding principles for economic policy in Britain, under Thatcher, and the United States, under Reagan, economic inequality increased significantly in both countries. Under Friedman's direction, President Reagan dramatically reduced the top tax rate from 74% to 25%. According to Tom Hartman, author of The Hidden History of American Oligarchy, Reclaiming Our Democracy from the Ruling Class, corporations contributed more than 30% of all federal revenue 5 years before Reagan, but now they account for just 6%. By the end of Reagan's presidency, that figure had dropped to about 12 or 14%. The trickle-down economics Reagan implemented resulted in the transfer of an estimated $50 trillion from American workers' paychecks to the wealthy. To establish his authority, one of Reagan's early actions as president was to fire air traffic controllers to intimidate workers and weaken labor unions. This led to jobs being shipped overseas and high-wage workers being replaced by foreign high-tech professionals, forcing American workers to compete for lower-paying jobs. In addition, Reagan's policies gave rise to a new oligarchy, where the wealthy gained political power by influencing elected officials through financial means. The result was rising inequality, which negatively impacted society in a variety of ways. According to Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett, authors of The Spirit Level, Why Inequality Matters, the damaging effects include higher levels of consumption, increased anxiety and illness, poor mental and physical health, and eroded trust, leading to a host of health and social problems such as violence, teenage pregnancy, drug abuse, educational challenges, incarceration, obesity, social mobility, trust, community life, and child well-being. These problems are more severe in wealthier and more unequal countries. The recent and current economic crises are a direct consequence of Reagan's economic policies. While a civil war in the US seems far-fetched and the possibility of an attack by another country unlikely, the Israel-Hamas conflict, the Russia-Ukraine war, the stock market decline, and the possibility of significant value collapse starting in 2026 and beyond raise concerns about a nuclear war due to the law of octave. The law of octaves, or law of the seven, is the mathematical foundation of modern music theory. It states that every macroscopic event goes through several seven-part cycles, represented by the seven musical notes C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. During these intervals, the momentum slows down between E and F and becomes apparent after F. Similarly, there is another change of motion between B and C, with the change occurring at C. This cycle repeats until the event is complete. The law of seven is reflected in the piano keyboard. Between E and F keys and the C and D keys, there is no black key, symbolizing a change of direction or internal change. Examples of the law of seven can be observed in many different aspects of life, such as 1. The periodic table, in which the elements are arranged in 7 cycles. 2. White light consists of 7 spectra. 3. A week consists of 7 days. 4. Many modern marriages end in divorce after about 7 years. 5. Human life consists of many 7-year cycles, notably the so-called silver-haired divorce that occurs between the ages of 49 and 56, that is, the B and C period. The octave law can be observed more clearly with the stock market. Jack Woida, a former executive at Mentor Graphics, analyzed stock market data and found that the average up and down cycle lasted between 6.9 and 7.75 years, which closely matched the octave law pattern. After about 4.6 years, or the node F, the market entered an uptrend, followed by a 2.4-year downtrend, about 3 years after the node F, or the BC period. These 7 years totaled 7 notes, indicating a complete cycle. The market then entered a new cycle and repeated the pattern. While Jack Woida may not have known about the octave law, his findings were remarkably consistent with its principles. In addition, this 7-year stock market cycle has been observed across the U.S. economy since 1931, according to Morgan Stanley's Ruchir Sharma. Some examples. 1. From 2016 to 2022, COVID-19 broke out in 2019, i.e., Node F, followed by the Russia-Ukraine war in 2022, i.e., Note B. To save the economy, a total of $8 trillion was pumped into various measures. 2. From 2008 to 2015, the government raised interest rates, while China devalued the yuan twice. In 2012, i.e., Note F, the market experienced an oscillation but avoided a collapse as the government pumped in $4 trillion through 3 stimulus packages. These stimulus packages reduced the entropy pressure that avoided the 2015 recession, i.e. Notes BC. 3. From 2002 to 2008, the market faced a significant challenge when Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns, 2 investment firms, went bankrupt in 2008, at Notes BC. The subsequent stock market crash caused the worst recession since the Great Depression of 1929, and the U.S. government intervened by spending nearly $1 trillion to bail out the banks. 4. From 1995 to 2001, the dot-com bubble burst in 2001, at Notes BC, causing the market to plummet by more than half. The September 11 terrorist attacks also occurred in 2001, at Notes BC. Starting in 1998, at F, the government pumped money into the market to solve the Y2K problems, and China joined the World Trade Organization, WTO, in 2001. All of these happened at Notes BC. 5. From 1988 to 1994, the bond market experienced a crash in 1994, at BC. 6. From 1993 to 1987, Black Monday on October 19, 1987 at BC saw the market fall 23%. 7. From 1974 to 1980, the savings and loan crisis erupted in 1980, at BC. The government responded by raising interest rates to 15% to fight inflation. In 1980, Ronald Reagan took office and significantly increased defense spending. 8. From 1967 to 1973, the Yom Kippur War broke out between Israel and the Arabs in 1973 at BC, leading to an Arab oil embargo and a crisis that lasted until 1975. The end of the American Empire. The 7-year stock market cycle has been scientifically proven. According to the law of octaves, the market tends to correct itself every 7 years. Effective economic policy therefore only requires tax collection to meet social obligations and balance the budget. However, current policies may lead to an unprecedented crisis, affecting economic, political, military and social aspects. We are currently in a 7-year cycle from 2023 to 2029. The stock market is expected to rise from 2023 to 2025, lose momentum in 2026 and finally collapse in 2029. However, the market is expected to rise after 2029 under normal circumstances, but current global tensions, particularly the Russia-Ukraine war and conflicts in the Middle East, suggest that a doomsday scenario for the world. A major event is predicted to occur between 2025 and 2026, with the impact peaking around 2029. This period could see a severe economic downturn between 2026 and 2029. There is also an increased risk of nuclear conflict after 2025, as oligarchs appear intent on weakening Russia, despite it being the country with the largest nuclear arsenal. From Russia's perspective, however, there is an existential threat, as the West seeks to defeat and break up Russia into many small, defenseless states, thus facilitating the exploitation of its resources and bringing Russian President Vladimir Putin before the international court. However, the reality of the battlefield shows that despite the broad support of the West, Ukraine is unlikely to defeat Russia, which can neutralize all Western weapons. Therefore, the possibility of the North Atlantic Organization disintegrating and taking with it the US's world hegemony seems very high. A notable factor that makes the 7-year cycle 2023 to 2029 important is the Israel-Hamas war. Normally, each cycle starts very well, but Hamas' attack on Israel in the first year of the cycle on October 7, 2023, is a sign of a potential conflict around the world. Unlike the Arab coalitions that were easily defeated in the 1967 and 1973 wars, the efforts to defeat the irregular forces of Hamas and Hezbollah have not been very successful, not to mention the resistance axis led by Iran. It is likely that Israel would not exist, and without it, Western influence in the Middle East would be greatly diminished. In addition to the Russia-Ukraine war and conflicts in the Middle East, with the rise of China, Russia and the BRICS bloc. After the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944, the US dollar became the world currency, serving as the standard for other currencies. However, after the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine war in February 2022, many countries began to avoid using the US dollar in cross-border transactions. This trend endangers the dollar's status as a reserve currency and could undermine the US's position as the sole superpower, marking the end of US hegemony. Another concern is the 80-year war cycle in American history. This theory holds that the United States experiences significant domestic crises that typically lead to major wars about every 80 years. The first was the Revolutionary War from 1776 to 1783, followed by the Civil War, 1861 to 1865. The third was the United States' entry into World War II in 1941. The most recent began on January 6, 2021, when Donald Trump attempted to overturn the results of the 2020 election. The 80-year war cycle is actually another form of the 7-year cycle, where each of the 7 musical notes represents 10 years. Based on past history, when a major event is about to happen, some important figures will appear. For example, World War II requires Hitler, Stalin, Roosevelt, Churchill, etc. According to the law of octaves, humanity will witness the greatest crisis in history, starting from 2026 to 2029 and possibly lasting for many years. Among current politicians, Donald Trump is the most special figure because he is the leader of the most powerful nation on earth. He is the 47th President of the United States, has been impeached twice, and is a convicted criminal. Yet he was still able to return to politics and be re-elected gloriously. And immediately after taking office, he signed extremely bold decrees, unprecedented in American history. For example, he established the Department of Government Efficiency, abbreviated as DOGE, directed by billionaire Elon Musk with the mission of cutting federal spending, firing many government employees, disbanding USAID, an independent agency of the U.S. government responsible for administering civilian foreign aid and development assistance, and creating the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, led by Robert Kennedy Jr. to ensure that people are protected from the toxic chemicals, pollutants, pesticides, pharmaceutical products, and food additives that have contributed to many serious health crises in this country. According to some experts, Trump's drastic action could signal an unprecedented revolution in American history, and if successful, it will usher in a new, brighter, more prosperous era for America. However, in terms of foreign policy, Trump's policy is full of contradictions and seems to lack deep thinking. For example, Trump wants to end the Russia-Ukraine war to have a free hand to deal with China, but he only meets with Russia and ignores Ukraine and NATO allies. This has caused panics in European leaders who scramble to quickly find a plan for post-Trump Europe, meaning that the US has lost its most important allies. Since World War II, thanks to NATO allies, the US has been able to stop the expansion of international communism. Also since World War II, NATO allies have followed the US to find markets and protect markets for the capitalists. The US has lost its most important allies, but also wants to confront China. Today's China is no longer the China of the past. Militarily, China has been able to catch up with the US, economically, it has surpassed the US, and is supported by Russia. And that's not all. Trump wants to annex his ally Canada and the Danish island of Greenland, wants to reclaim the Panama Canal and reclaim the Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan. Thus, Trump has created too many enemies at once and become isolated by losing all important allies. Most serious of all, Trump wants to impose tariffs on the whole world, which means turning the whole world against him. It is often said that those who do not know history are doomed to repeat it. Shortly after the 1929 crisis, the Smoot-Hawley Act of 1930 caused the stock market to collapse. The purpose of this bill was to protect American farmers, but it increased food prices and other costs. This act and the retaliatory tariffs imposed by America's trading partners were major factors in the 67% drop in U.S. imports and exports during the Great Depression. Economists and economic historians agree that this act exacerbated the effects of the Great Depression for the following reasons. 1. Tariffs raise prices. Tariffs are taxes on imports and exports, and when they increase, prices also increase. 2. International trade decreases. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930 caused a 66% drop in global trade between 1929 and 1934. 3. Other countries retaliate. Other countries responded to the act by raising their own tariffs. 4. Manufacturing output collapses. The loss of export markets caused a collapse in manufacturing output. 5. Increased job loss. Workers losing their manufacturing jobs made the Great Depression worse. 6. International relations strain. tariff strained relations with other countries, contributing to World War II. Additionally, while Trump ran on a platform of tax cuts, most Americans will see their taxes go up as a result of his policies. Economists estimate that the average household will pay more than $1,200 a year. Furthermore, as countries with tariffs seek partners, global supply chains are disrupted, driving up prices. And from the perspective of the average voter, tariffs are a form of demagogy because they see them as patriotic. That was the statement made more than 40 years ago by the late President Ronald Reagan during his 1980 presidential campaign.
You see, at first, when someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. What eventually occurs is, first, homegrown industries start relying on government protection in the form of high tariffs. They stop competing and stop making the innovative management and technological changes they need to succeed in world markets. And then, while all this is going on, something even worse occurs. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. The result is more and more tariffs, higher and higher trade barriers, and less competition. So soon, because of the prices made artificially high by tariffs that subsidize inefficiency and poor management, people stop buying. Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs. The memory of all this occurring back in the 30s made me determined when I came to Washington to spare the American people the protectionist legislation that destroys prosperity.
So Reagan agreed with economists that tariffs were bad for the economy. However, after taking office in 1981, Reagan was forced to impose tariffs on Japanese products, but he did not call them tariffs, but anti-dumping, and forced Japan to sign the Plaza Accord to devalue the dollar against the Japanese yen and the German mark, making American products cheaper on the world market. But this did not help the American economy because American cars could not compete with German and Japanese cars, and especially Japanese electronics. It was not until the 1990s when the World Wide Web appeared that the demand for computers and components needed for the Internet helped the American economy skyrocket. So from an economic perspective, tariffs were a sign that they could not compete with world goods, so they had to use tariffs to protect domestic products. However, in the 1980s, the United States only had to deal with Germany and Japan. Today, in the global economy, the US has to compete with many other countries, especially China. In addition, the tariffs that Trump applied to Canada, Mexico, Europe and China made investors lose confidence. That is why in a short time, US stocks plummeted, while in just 3 months, the stock of billionaire Elon Musk's Tesla company evaporated 50%, and during that time, Musk's capitalization decreased by more than $100 billion. This is a very bad sign for the US economy and President Trump personally. According to the Octave Law, the US economy is in the 2023 to 2029 cycle, and under normal conditions, US stocks should increase from 2023 to late 2025 and early 2026. But the fact that stock market has gone into a correction in early 2025 is an unusual sign. This is understandable. Trump is a businessman, but he does not have much experience in politics and especially foreign affairs. Impulsive decisions and lack of strategic vision will certainly have many unpredictable consequences for the world in general and the US in particular. Conclusion. Historical U.S. stock market data since 1931 suggests a recurring 7-year cycle of 4 years of growth followed by 3 years of correction, mirroring the 7 musical notes, CF for growth, GB for correction. This current cycle, from 2023 to 2029, anticipates growth until late 2025, a slowdown in 2026, and a potential collapse in 2029. However, the cycle's onset coincided with the October 7, 2023 Palestinian uprising, and escalating conflicts like the Israel-Hamas war and the Russia-Ukraine war could trigger a larger conflict by 2026, culminating in 2029. Historian Alfred McCoy projects China supplanting the U.S. as a superpower by 2030, supported by PricewaterhouseCoopers' forecast that China's economy will surpass the U.S. by at least 50% by 2029. Furthermore, a hypothetical second Trump presidency, marked by immediate trade wars, domestic unrest from reforms like Social Security cuts, undocumented immigrant deportations causing labor shortages which eventually drive the costs higher. Trump also wants to impeach the judge who bars Elon Musk from accessing SSA's data, resulting in a rare rebuke from Chief Justice John Roberts for interfering with the independence of the judiciary. All of this rapidly destabilizes the economy as exemplified by a multi-trillion-dollar stock market loss, and a substantial decline in Elon Musk's wealth and Tesla's market capitalization despite his financial support for Trump's election. Consequently, the projected 2029 crisis overshadows the 1929 crash, signaling a shift from Western to Eurasian African global dominance after 4 centuries. Thank you for watching. If you feel that this video is informative, please like, subscribe, and share.